call this ad hoc committee for Parkland preservation to order. This is a recommittal from November of 2010. And I'd like to, my name is Shane Agersheth, and I'm the chairperson. I'd like to also introduce committee members Fred Visconti, as well as Mary Teicholz. And we have ex officio members Paul Rotello, as well as Dwayne Perkins. We have with us also, we have Michael Marcus, chairman of the TPA, and the vice chair, right, correct? Or the chair? Chair now? President of the Land Trust. Of the Land Trust now.
Danbury, yeah.
We have Sandy here, Sandy Moy, executive director, right, still?
Right.
Nothing's changed. Terry Wild from Terry Wild Park, and then we also have William Montgomery, retired, but still active.
I'm on the board.
Still on the board for the Land Trust.
Right.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
I'm Barbara Tallarico. I'm just I'm a TPA member, authority member.
Okay,
Just-
Barbara Tallarico,
just listening.
TPA member.
Okay, so Bill Montgomery is on what board?
Land Trust
Land
of
Trust.
Danbury. Board of Directors, Land Trust of Danbury.
Thank you.
So again, this is a recommittal of an ad hoc, and just to recap what's transpired, maybe we can have our corporation counsel, Bob Yannon, go over the events that brought us to the recommittal, as well as what we have in front of us now.
All right, well, thank you. Well, I think we should begin at the beginning, which was the genesis of this committee, which was an initiative by the mayor to urge the council to take measures to enhance protection of parkland in general in Danbury. And this was back in 2006, so this committee has a long pedigree. And eventually, the committee became focused on just Terry Wild. And the committee came up with somewhat elaborate amendments to the Code of Ordinances, came up with 13A-50, which Ms. Moy alluded to in your letter to the committee. And the feeling was that we became somewhat sidetracked because we were focusing just on Terry Wild. And so that eventually led to a recommittal of our committee recommendations, back to this committee. So, into Corporation Council. So, Corporation Council shifted gears to try and focus on protecting parkland in general, and we came up with an amendment to section 2-133 of the Code of Ordinances, which, does everybody have, through the chair, does everybody have copies of that? Do we have copies of that? Or?
I have one. Does everyone have one?
I don't think anyone has one except for committee members.
You know, well, it's pretty short, you just read it. It's only,
It's not that short.
no, nobody has it.
Now, how many copies do you have? Just one?
I have one here. Actually,
Oh,
there's
I thought-
Well,
one.
that's the one for the
I
file.
thought Jean,
I thought she had some copies.
made copies for it. Do you have a copy?
I have my copy, yeah, that I got when I sat down.
Well, I can make
And I
copies.
think, Paul, you have a
I
copy.
got one right here, yeah.
Yeah,
on the,
because I was gonna say, I know Les got had a copy.
Well,
of that.
perhaps I can make copies at, the Office of Corporation Counsel, but the gist of it is,
You got one.
the gist of it is to require a supermajority vote before any parkland, well, let me go through it just briefly. The city council would appoint a surplus property committee of 3 or more of its members.
Mrs. Rotel, I think.
Is it?
The door was
I
locked,
knew that
so we
voice.
all
You do that voice?
in. Here, come in.
An escort.
No, let's give him a chance.
Mrs. Turk,
And Mrs. Turk.
formidable pair.
Let's make some room here.
How are you, Pearl?
Why don't you sit here, I'll walk around. I'll walk.
Hello, Mother. Mrs. Rotello, I should say.
What's the
We
call?
send Mrs. Ravel out. How are you?
Hello, Pearl.
Good.
How are you? Good to see you.
Good to
Oh.
see you.
Everybody's in here? Oh, perfect.
How's that?
So we have copies being made right now, so we'll have copies to pass out to everyone.
They
And
just started
and for the
to
record, we have
or explain that.
members of the public here as well. Mr. Rotella and Pearl Turk. Okay. Hello, Pearl.
And Vivian, what's Vivian's last name?
Vivian Emerson.
Vivian Emerson.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
Just briefly, the subsection A of the proposed amendment would require a surplus committee of 3 or more members to make a recommendation to the council. Subsection B would require at least one public hearing and duly noticed. Now, all this is in addition to everything that is already pre-existing. For example, under Connecticut General Statute 7-163A, all the requirements that you have to meet to
The state statutes.
dispose of city property in any event. Subsection C is probably the key provision. It requires that any positive recommendation of the committee to declare parkland or open space real property as surplus would require a supermajority, well, I'm paraphrasing, a 2/3 vote of the full council, supermajority. This is the key addition because heretofore, this first step would only have required a majority vote. And then the last step would require, in other words, actually selling the property or disposing, leasing, or whatever, would require, in the normal course of events, a supermajority, just as it does now. So, it creates an initial hurdle that you have to overcome to be able to dispose of or deal with any parkland or open space. This only applies to parkland or open space, this additional supermajority vote. If it's not parkland, you just fall back on the existing provisions, which, at the end of the process already require a supermajority vote to dispose of any real estate, whether it's parkland or not, any city-owned real estate. So, I think it's a substantial additional hurdle to overcome, an enhancement to protection of all parklands, and it meets hopefully meets the objections of folks that we were only focusing on, Terry Wild, which is what was going on before. So, we would not be dealing with 13A-50 at all right now. So, unfortunately, that probably wasn't communicated in advance, but.
Yeah, just for the record, and maybe if Corporation Counsel can elaborate, we had received the letter May 25th, and in reference to our last ad hoc, and which never, since the committee since everything got recommitted, it was never adopted. So it's not something that's in play. But if Corporation Counsel can address it, so the
Address the
TPA,
letter?
yeah, just so the TPA understands
Take one of these.
how this impacts their position statement here.
Yeah.
Could I see it, Shay?
Sure.
What's the letter? So again, just to reiterate, I want to make it clear that if we went forward with Corporation Counsel's recommendation, which is this enhancement of 2-133, which of course would protect Terry Wild as much as would protect any other parkland or open space, we would not be addressing the proposed, and they were only proposed in any event, amendments that we were talking about last year to 13850, which focus solely on Terrywell. There's nothing to prevent, you know, any member of the council or even any member of the public or any member of the authority from proposing, you know, specific recommendations in the future having to do with Terrywell. But
that would be a separate,
that would be a separate and actually a new committee, because if this is voted up or down, that would probably close out, if the new proposal is voted up, it would probably close out this committee.
Right.
I hope that's not too confusing, but, I mean,
No.
the gist of it is that, you know, this whole thing is irrelevant for tonight's meeting. And, you know, there are even, some people even raised legal objections that it was too far afield from the charge of the committee. I didn't feel that way, but, because, you know, if the committee was organized to protect Parkland, you know, Terrywell is obviously Parkland, and I viewed it as a subset of the original charge of the committee, but, you know, we don't want to do something that's ambiguous and that may be open to challenge. Somebody could argue that whatever we came up with really didn't speak to the charge of the committee. But again, there's nothing to prevent future committees from addressing Terrywell specifically.
okay. Yes,
If I may address through the chair, council. First of all, I want to make it clear that since I am the chair of the Terrywell Park Authority and the Danbury Land Trust, and since they both, though greatly in favor of preserving open space, that's our common ground. The two organizations have a different approach to how it should be done. So I'm not expressing an opinion, and Bill can express it for the Land Trust and Sandy, of course, for the Park Authority. However, I have two technical questions. As I read the original work of this, the output of this committee, I was concerned that they, and you're telling me now that that's moot, that we're not discussing that.
Right.
Okay, fine, because, okay, there was, in the original charter of that the council set up for the Terrywell Park Authority, the Park Authority, as I read it, and I think Dennis Alpern also brought it out at one of these meetings, that you couldn't dispose of parkland without a vote of the TPA, as I read the way it was set up. And I think Dennis agreed with that back then. And my concern was that what the output of this committee might have weakened that protection. But if the output of the committee doesn't deal with that at all.
Right, it's a
Okay,
point
fine.
of whether or not you're right.
Yeah, right, I didn't realize
remember that came
that,
up.
yeah, I didn't realize that until Dennis brought it up, and I certainly wouldn't argue with Dennis. You may. But-
Your brother might.
Yeah, but, okay. Number one. Number two, as I also read the output of this committee, the recommendation of the committee, I was concerned, and I think erroneously, and I'd just like to put that to rest if anybody else had that concern, that we have we made it more difficult for the city to acquire land?
Absolutely not.
Okay, because the original output may have done that, but if this amendment probably clears that all up anyway. Because I was just concerned as I read it, and I said, we don't want to tie the administration and the council ability to slow up the process if they want to acquire land. That's all. Thank you.
yeah, no problem, no problem.
If I could.
Yes.
Just address that. Neither one of these, for that matter, neither one of these proposals
Okay.
Have anything to do with acquisition and accretions. It's really
Okay.
the other end of the spectrum.
That's why you're the lawyer.
Yeah.
And I would like to just state for the record that, and to rest assured, and I know Mr. Montgomery is well aware of this as well, but this particular administration, but I would say our council has done significant work in actually acquiring open space. And I mean, we've been very proactive with it, and we have just in the short period of time that Fred, myself, Mary, Paul, and Dwayne have been on the council. I think I'm very excited about it. I mean, in my former life, I was chairman of the Environmental Impact Commission, and that was also one of my things that I had focused on for years. And I'm very pleased to see, especially seeing some of the other local towns and cities in the area that are not as proactive. So from that standpoint, I can't complain. And we have the other neat thing, and it's unfortunate Dennis isn't here, but we have also set up, if you will, a game plan as to what we're looking to acquire. So, I mean, we have prioritized a list, which I think is very important, rather than trying to piecemeal things out later. I think we've done a fantastic job. I just wanted to state that for the record. But I will open it up first to committee members for any questions.
I don't have any right now.
No?
I'm just a little confused because I thought we were still working on Article 5 and then I came in and it's something completely different than what we've been working on for months. So I understand, but I'm still like trying to read through everything because we just got this tonight and kind of figure out exactly what it is. Because we spent many hours working on Article 5. We spent a long time working on it. So to switch gears now and just find out when I walk in the door was kind of, it was a little bit jarring. And I do understand that it's to protect all of the areas, not just to have it toward Article 5 at Terrywile Park Authority. I don't know, I guess I have to read this a little better and just kind of think a little more.
Through the chair, I mean, as soon as you switch focus away from Terrywile to Parkland preservation in general, that this whole thing becomes irrelevant.
Yeah, I understand that.
By definition, it Article 5, it only deals with Terrywile. So, this new proposal also has the advantage of being pretty simple.
It does.
But it's
How did the original committee start? I was not on the original
the mayor.
Parkland Preservation
Through the
Committee.
chair, the mayor, this was earlier in his administration when we were just starting to gear up to have as one of the major focuses of the administration acquisition and protection of Parkland. I've done at least half a dozen closings myself, most of which are so small that you don't know about them. They're not all like the Farrington property, but part of his gearing up was a request for proposals in general, completely wide open, proposals as to how we could enhance protection of parks, legally. So when we finally got rolling, I think, if I recall, it just seemed overwhelming to focus on all the parks, and Terrywile is obviously the jewel, so we began to focus on that, and that led us to Article 5, and we just beefed up Article 5 pretty significantly. And eventually, again, to reiterate what I earlier talked about, we received quite a bit of criticism that we shouldn't just be focusing on Terrywile, just because as a legal matter, that wasn't the charge of the committee. A committee should try and
Right.
you know, we have some flexibility, so we went back to the drawing board and came up with something that would address, you know, more specifically the charge of the committee, which is parkland preservation in general. And we thought this was a pretty simple but effective way to do it. Because this is a pretty significant hurdle to get over. 2 successive supermajority votes would be required if this were adopted. The one we already have for any city property, and then an additional supermajority vote for parkland or open space. So that's how we got to where we are.
And to reiterate, based on our last meeting, obviously can't change the charter, but in your opinion, and in Attorney Pinter's opinion, permanent conservation easements don't work. They're not, and it's not something that is.
Well, we had a wide array of policy problems and legal and technical problems with them.
Gotcha. Okay. So all in all, this was the best approach that you and Attorney Pinter came up with.
Well, we thought it was the simplest way to get something in place right away. Because those sweeping approaches, you know, aside from being often unworkable or unattractive from a policy standpoint, depending on your point of view, you know, they're so controversial, you know, they could take years to get put in place. So we wanted to get something in place right away, since this committee has been around for 5 years.
Good.
So we went back and looked at the relevant code of ordinance sections and focused on this one.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair to the Corporation Council. I sort of feel the same way as Mary does. Some of this can get a little bit confusing. You mentioned before something about there may be a problem with the city and the Terrawell Authority or Land Trust in having, if there was going to be a sale of properties, and who would have the final say. Could you just touch base on that?
But I think Mr. Marcus mentioned that.
Somebody did.
Well,
I don't remember.
well, yeah, none of that is within the 4 corners of this proposal.
It doesn't enter into
The city would
anything.
have the final say.
The city would have the final say.
And now this proposal would make it more difficult to which is what we want, to, you know, dispose of or encumber, you know, leasing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sale. Parkland or open space.
Thank you.
We use the term parkland and open, to try to broaden, you know, cover more property.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
This is a good start. I don't want to call it quick and dirty because it's been 5 or 6 years, so obviously it's been a while getting here. And I don't want to call it dirty either, for that matter, because it's pretty well thought. But it gets us in the door, and I think it raises the level of protection, particularly to city-owned property. As most of us are aware, that the Tabersack bill a couple of years ago required at least one public hearing, and I'm not sure if it required a supermajority on the governing body, the aldermen, the council, whatever it happens to be, we do that. So even without this, if we wanted to sell parkland or city land, we would have to have a public hearing. And then after the public hearing, we'd meet as a full council and vote on that. In addition to that, we now have an ad hoc, we call it here a surplus property committee of 3 or more. That's essentially an ad hoc. That recommendation goes to a public hearing. At the end of that public hearing, it goes back to the council for its first 2/3 majority with the condition that, I guess, planning, is it planning and zoning, or is it just planning? The planning commission. And you have to get positive reports from the planning commission. It doesn't speak to what happens if, because you've got the planning commission and from city departments to which the matter has been referred, it doesn't speak to what happens if there's a conflict, if planning says no and another department says yes, but fine, okay, let's just assume that everybody has to come in positive. And then it goes back for a full vote for a 2/3 majority. And that's good. It's really good for city-owned property. If the city has land on the west side, or it's got land on Ridgebury Road or something like that, that we're thinking about dumping or developing or something like that, it's good to slow that process down a little bit. This doesn't stop the process, obviously, but it does slow it down and get some input from the people. Where I think this falls down is what happens with Parkland. Parkland is special, and I think that if you query your constituents, my guess is, and I've spoken to some of them obviously before this meeting and in the past couple of years about this, but most people think that Parkland is all but impossible to sell. It's a park, you can't sell it. It's like selling the Statue of Liberty. It would take an act of Congress to sell it. But we know, and the people here at this table and a handful of other people know that that's not the case, that we can sell Parkland essentially whenever we feel like it. I think that would be pretty big news to most people. And the issue that I have with this ordinance is that the only thing between disposing of Parkland under the Tabersac bill, which is a public hearing, and this is that we're adding one more public hearing. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with
And
that.
supermajority vote.
That's correct, right. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that the way that we get to a public hearing and what a public hearing actually is does not, in my view, afford the level of protection that I think most of our constituents feel is already in existence for Parkland, or at least if it's not, should be. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. This all starts, as it says in here, duly noticed with a legal notice, generally in a newspaper, which, with all due respect to the News Times, fewer and fewer people are reading. So most people are actually not going to see that legal notice. That's going to roll right into a public hearing that most people are not going to be aware of. Let's assume that the newspaper picks up on this and actually publishes a story. Some people might hear about it, but they're not going to hear about it directly. So that first public hearing is probably going to come and go. But the ad hoc, forget it, nobody's going to come to that. Unless there's a couple of people who happen to hear about this and really have a horse in the race. So you're going to have an unnoticed, even though it's duly noticed, an essentially unnoticed initial ad hoc committee and public hearing that only at that point, assuming that the disposition is voted in the affirmative to sell Terry Wild Park or Rogers Park or the ball fields or some insane thing like that. But this happens. I mean, it's happening all over the country right now. This is going to come to a pretty big shock to most people who either use these facilities or live near them. The easiest thing to do, the hardest thing to do, I think, is probably the best thing, and that would be a referendum. I mean, as we know, we who tried to buy parks in the past, we've tried to buy open space. You've done most of the closings on these. To get the money for those purchases, we generally have to go to a referendum. It's a pretty big deal to get that money. When we did the open space bonding, which I think was $5 or $6 million, we had to go to the voters to get that money. I think they'd be pretty surprised that we needed to go to them to buy them, but we didn't need to go to them to sell them. One of the problems with a public hearing is that we are telling the voters that they have our permission to voice an opinion. But we are not telling them that we are giving them the authority to tell us what to do. After that public hearing, after both of them, if everybody rises up and says, we don't want you to sell you the parks, we can still sell them. We are not bound by any way, shape, or form by a public hearing, by what happens in a public hearing. So while a public hearing is great to get input for us, it doesn't bind us. And not to beat a dead horse on this, these parks aren't ours. We don't own them. The people that we are making these decisions for actually own the parks. So I'm not suggesting this right now, but I think down the road, we should probably think about increasing, and again, I just want to reiterate, I think this is a great start. You guys have obviously put a lot of effort into this, but we should think at some point down the road, maybe when you guys come back, when another ad hoc comes back for Terrywile, increasing the level of protection. But I think what we could do is we could add one thing to this, which I think would actually go a long way in noticing the people about a potential sale, and that would be something as simple as a sign. Many communities, when someone is requesting a liquor permit or a zone change, require the petitioner to put a sign on the property. We don't do that in Danbury. I've had many conversations with Dennis Alpern about that, and I think at some point the zoning commission will eventually require that for a zone change, because believe me, nobody is reading the legal notices anymore, and I mean, people see a factory going up, what used to be a residential zone, they wonder how that happened. Well, it happened because there was a whole process that you didn't come to because you weren't aware of it. A sign, it sounds like a stupid idea, but a 4x8 sign on Terrywile Park. This park is proposed for sale at Rogers Park, at Farrington, whatever. People are driving by it, they see it, gets their attention. Public hearing about this park, they do it for cell phone things and things like that. It sounds like that costs about $100. We could add this to the legislation tonight and forward it on to the council. And that would at least remove my feelings of well, I'll wait for the tape to flip.
Okay.
It would remove my feeling of trepidation if someone were to come to me after this process had gone all the way through and the park was sold, and they said to me, Councilman, I never even knew that this was going to happen. How could that be? You live next door. Well, I just didn't know. I don't get the paper, and I don't go online, blah, blah, blah. And of course, maybe in a democracy, you have a certain level of responsibility, and you're supposed to be doing those things, but not everybody does. So I would like to see, at some point, having a sale of parkland, not regular public property. I think this is completely fine for regular property, but for parkland, go to referendum. But in the meantime, before that happens, and I'm not sure that the city would be comfortable doing that, but at the very least, I would like to see a sign on the property alerting people at an intersection at the closest point of that park that the future of that park was in question. I think that's about all that I have for now.
Through the chair, there already exists a signage requirement.
Okay, I didn't see that in your, is that in the state regs?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Well, you should have stopped me, Bob.
well, I didn't want to. You're doing
This
some
guy's,
nice.
yeah.
Really, I like it. I didn't want to, for all, it doesn't have to be parkland for any city property.
Okay, but we've sold property, I've never seen a sign for,
Well, we just put one up, recently on the old police station.
okay, all right, good.
And I forget, a couple other,
There's one over near Reading.
yeah, there's a couple of, we already have
Okay,
that.
good.
It's a great
No,
idea.
no,
but-
that eases my mind a lot.
You know.
If I can just say, to speak to Mary, one thing you could do is continue this. You could vote this up or down. Vote this particular ordinance up or down and continue, keep the ad hoc open with a request that the Corporation Council at the next council hearing speak to the validity of focusing on Terrywile. Once you get that out of the way, you could then come back with this open, or simply close it and put, because you still have time, Shay, you could do this, or Mary, whoever wants to do this, put in a request that the full council form an ad hoc, maybe with the same people that were on this
A
one.
new one.
A new one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a
To look at
different
Terrywile.
I think that'd be a
Yeah.
better,
Right, so you keep this one open and ask them if you could actually do it, or just close this one, and then send a letter to Jean next week and tell her that you want to do a new ad hoc, just for Terrywile.
you know what, just sort of in terms of, kind of conceptual, I have a little bit of a disagreement with Councilman Ortella. Conceptually, this whole idea of cutting out the public, when the council acts, especially with a supermajority, that is the people. That's the whole idea. I mean, of representative government. That I find, I don't know, I would have a hard time entertaining the argument that, you know, the people and the voters are, you know, are given short shrift, or however you want to characterize it, because the council, when the council acts in this way, it really is, you know, the people. So it's the people voting to dispose of a, you know, a portion of a park or whatever the issue is. So, you know, I mean, I don't know, there's only so far I think you can push that argument before, you know, you get into this whole idea of, you know, having referenda for everything, and, you know, the farther you go with that, you're kind of getting away from representative government. It's almost like a direct democracy idea. And you see what happened with that in California, it was kind of a disaster. But anyway, I mean, I guess a happy medium.
If I can respond to that, we are acting as proxy for the people. I mean, and there's a long history of that in America, and it's a system that works very well. And I agree with you, Bob, up to a point. I guess my initial point was that generally when we move to acquire such large parcels, we have to go to the voters to ask them for money. And my feeling about that is that since the city has a pretty big history of doing that, that's how we bought Terrywile. The city itself did not want to buy Terrywile. We actually went directly to the public. We went around the city to buy Terrywile. I think since this is how we normally proceed, whether we go directly with a referendum that starts from the grassroots, or we go to referendum through the city council to acquire the funds because we exceed our bonding, my guess, and it's just a guess, but it's based on some experience, that people probably think that the reverse is also true, that we have to go to them to dispose of the park. But that's not true. We don't have to go to them. So all I'm saying is let's make it balanced. If we have to go to them to buy the park, we might as well ask them if we can sell it, that's all. It's just a level of protection that I think parks and open space deserve. And I don't mean that we need to do this every single time we want to fill a pothole. But for something like this, to use your narrative, for the jewel in the crown of Danbury, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if we said, you know, under certain circumstances, we do need to go to the voters. Obviously, that's my opinion, but I don't think it undermines our history of democracy here in Danbury. You know, I think we can do both.
Ms. Talrico, did you have one?
Well, I think
No,
Sandy.
Oh, did you?
Let Sandy
She
speak
keeps
for
prodding me
me.
a little. Did you want to say something before?
No, go ahead.
I know it's council's goes first. I just wanted to ask, when the authority came up with a policy statement, it was in reaction to the provisions that were being changed. The one section on that at the bottom of our letter where we asked about the ex officio, how would we go about doing that, where we would eliminate the ex officio that's already in the ordinance that covers Terrywell? I guess that would be through something separate.
Through the chair. Well, we would have to, it would have to start in an ad hoc committee and then generate a proposed ordinance change, just in the same manner as we're doing this,
Right.
to this ordinance, and it would have to go through the council and the public hearing and so forth.
That was in a reaction to also adding more people to as ex officio members to the authority. So not so much the director of recreation, which is in there now, but there was another several other people that were being added. Anyway, the other question that I had, and I think this maybe goes back to what Fred was asking and Michael Marcus was asking, how does this then involve the authority when there is a sale? Because the original ordinance says that the Common Council of the City of Danbury shall retain the following powers and responsibilities for the administration of the park. Then it says, upon the recommendation of the authority, final approval for the acquisition, purchase, sale, lease, or other conveyance of lands and property within or to be added to Terrywell Park and all conditions attached thereto. So does that then mean that this ordinance goes into the mix with this whole new park?
It's another layer.
It's another layer. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that that doesn't change that in any way, and I
Yeah.
had the feeling it didn't, but I
No.
just wanted to be sure and
No,
clarify.
it's cumulative. It doesn't replace any other requirements that have to be met in order to move forward, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Perkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I had it, but now I don't think I have it anymore.
Doesn't have a chance.
You understood it until somebody explained it.
Just a second ago, it's gone.
Oh, questions?
Just
No,
quick
they
statements first, and
understand.
then maybe I will have a question. Kind of sharing the thoughts of Ms. Teitschultz and Mr. Visconti, and the fact that, and I'm not going to speak for you, but I'm just trying to summarize some of your thoughts. I think that they were looking at the 13A 50 and expecting to see language stricken from that, having new language included to include the park land and open space, kind of piggybacked upon each other. But it seems to me like, based on discussions, that everything's starting to get separated out. And there may actually be another time and point where we come back and revisit the whole Terry-Wild thing. But I thought that this should all be kind of together, but it doesn't seem like it is.
Well, you're right. We really aren't addressing Terry-Wild specifically at all in this new ordinance. You're right. And in fact, we suggested, you know, perhaps a new committee. There's nothing to prevent anybody from proposing a new committee that would focus specifically on Terry-Wild and, you know, could address some of these concerns, for example, including, you know, cleaning up the language that you just alluded to. But, you know, this new proposal would cover all parkland and open space, including Terry-Wild, but it wouldn't deal with Article 5, you know, 13A at all, so.
Through the chair, but the whole Terry-Wild thing was the original charge of this committee right here and right now.
No,
No,
no.
but I think that was the problem.
That was the problem,
I mean, in
and
fact,
that's
that was
why.
kind of my assumption, because excuse, I mean, through the chair,
That's
you know, when I wasn't originally involved in this,
Neither was I.
Neither was I.
oh, you did? And I don't know, so when I became involved in it, kind of halfway through, everybody was talking about Terry-Wild, and I kind of assumed that, you know, if not, if it were not the sole focus, it was certainly a major focus, and then Dennis and I, you know, went off on a tangent and just focused on Terry-Wild and Article 5. So, and we went back and looked at the charge and discussions leading up to the committee, and everything became clear it was intended to cover parkland in general. So then we became concerned that if we enacted something, let's say we enacted these amendments, they could be challenged because, you know, they came out of a committee that really wasn't addressed to Terry-Wild. So, you know, it's probably unlikely that it would be, but, you know, we would prefer not to enact legislation that even arguably can be challenged on the road, especially if it deals with something like Terry-Wild. So we decided to shift our gear back to the original charge of the committee and try and come up with something that would protect parkland in general, including of course Terry-Wild, and then just emphasize to the committee that we would close this out, get this in, you know, assuming the council ratifies it, establish a new committee, if that's the will of the council, to focus on Terry-Wild.
Question.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Thank you. Through the, well, I won't say through the chair, anybody yet. What we are being asked, and what you just said, Bob, if we were to approve what we have in front of us this evening, does that in any way, shape, or form include Terry-Wild, or should we just continue this ad hoc till we can get something on Terry-Wild and do it all at once?
No, I don't think, this includes any parkland or open space, which of course includes Terry-Wild. So this, if we pass this, if the council ultimately passed this, it would apply to Terry-Wild as well as any other parkland. And it would enhance the protection of Terry-Wild. But I don't think this committee should focus on Terry-Wild specifically.
No. I'm not asking the committee to focus on Terrywell. You said that, obviously, that it does include Terrywell, but you also said a few sentences back that a committee could come out of nowhere in the council or from
A new
wherever.
committee.
A new
Has
committee,
nothing to do
or
with
someone
this.
could ask something to do with land that's involved with Terrywell. What I'm trying to say here is that I would prefer, and I've been on this thing for I don't know how many years, but I would prefer to see something come back to the council with everything included, with Terrywell being in here, rather than having to do this once and come back again to include Terrywell. My main concern is protect Terrywell all the way around. And I just think that would be the smartest thing to do. I don't think passing just this evening, and you said then we could come back under a new committee or whoever, or whatever, and then look at Terrywell. Why do that if we can just, continue what we've got here? We know, we're aware of what's going on by being here this evening, and then come back again next month or whenever, and then get something from you people to include Terrywell and put it all in one. That's what I'm trying to look at.
Well, I think if we go down that road, it gets us right back into the potential problem of doing something that we don't have the legal authority to do under the charge of this original committee. But again, this proposal does protect Terrywell. It doesn't have the word Terrywell in here, but it protects any parkland or open space. So I'm not quite sure why you believe it doesn't protect Terrywell.
I'm not saying it doesn't protect Terrywell, but we keep hearing that over and over again, Terrywell. What I'm trying to say is, if Terrywell is such a main concern, which it should be, why isn't Terrywell used in here? Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. I just think that we should do it all at once.
Because that would be focusing on one park, and that wasn't the original charge of the committee. So I think where we were going previously, we were kind of off track with that. But, to address the concerns everybody has of especially protecting Terrywell, we suggested that, there's nothing to prevent the council from establishing a new committee and, revisiting this or anything else that anybody could come up with to protect Terrywell specifically.
And under a new ad hoc committee, it would basically basically aimed simply at Terrywell.
Right, it would be
No other-
a committee.
Well, Terrywell, correct me if I'm wrong, is set up a little different, obviously.
In any event, right.
It's an authority, it has a master plan, it's a little different from, I think the town park is gonna be a little different, right? So, I see what Fred is saying, but going back to why the whole reason it got recommitted was because of the fact that it wasn't the charge. Right.
Right, we actually had,
Right.
objections from both caucuses. From all over the place. That kind of caught me by surprise, frankly, that, we were going down a road that we weren't authorized to go down by focusing specifically on Terrywell.
But this obviously, in answer to Fred's question, this still addresses Terrywell as well,
absolutely.
and it adds that extra layer of protection that we were looking for. So, yes.
One thing you need to know is whether this actually does address Terrywell. Terrywell was not designated a park when it was purchased in 1984. Lots happened since 1984. I don't know what the designation was, but in order to get Terrywell in front of the voters, the city insisted that it not be designated a park. It was simply a land purchase in 1984.
But would it still be considered open
Well, see, that's
space?
the thing.
Well,
I gotta say this. This is going to be my opinion, and you can jump in after this. But I think what you would need to do, and my suggestion is not that you remain open and continue this ad infinitum for the next 3 years until you nail this all down. But we should probably at some point discover what Terrywell actually is. We should go back to the original referendum that purchased Terrywell, and under what legal definition the purchase of that property became, whether it was simply simple city property, which the second part of this would speak to, the so-called Tabersac Bill, and whether in the intervening 25, 6, 7 years, the level of protection of Terry Wild was raised by some council. It hasn't been raised by us. As you know, we've tried over the last 5 years and we gave up, so we didn't do it. There may be another council that did do it. My guess is not, because in spite of some talk to the contrary, this essentially was, this ad hoc was put together with Terry Wild in mind. Because we all knew that Terry Wild had the absolute most minimum protection of all the parklands in Danbury. Inasmuch as it has an authority, and the authority has some say in this, which raises the level of protection to some extent. I don't know, because I don't have the deed, whether this new thing protects Terry Wild at all. I just don't know that. And I'm not saying that it doesn't. I don't know. And if I was on this committee, I couldn't vote for this with the assumption that this is going to affect Rogers Park, and it's going to affect, Highland Avenue, and it's going to affect Terry Wild, because Terry Wild's a park. Terry Wild may not be a park. It may not even be open space. It may be nothing more than the property that we have on Ridgebury Road. A lot of it, but it may be nothing more than that. So I would want to nail that down before I see anything.
Through the chair, since, well, I'm not on the committee, but I heard this raised by 2 council members. Would it be wrong to put in here, next to parentheses, 1, farmland and open space property, including Terry Wild Park?
Yeah.
Then there's no question as to
Well,
whether.
it wouldn't
it
be
is-
wrong, but I think it would get us back into the.
No, it just includes it.
By the way, I mean, 2 comments. Number one, even if theoretically this doesn't cover Terry Wild, by the way, I disagree with that. I'll address that in a second. Passing this would protect whatever is a park or open space, by definition, right? Whatever.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Number 2, I would probably be willing to write an opinion of the Office of Corporation Counsel opining that Terry Wild is parkland or open space without even doing much research, so it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that it's not.
It's in its title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't, Sandy, do you know?
It's in the title. And
It is in the charter as
it's
parkland.
25, how many years have we been using
25,
it?
yeah, it was 1985
Yeah.
was when it
Yeah.
was purchased. Yeah.
I mean,
Do you know the
that would be a pretty,
classification
that
of
would be a
it?
stretch.
No.
I would-
No.
I thought it was a park.
Barbara Tellerico said that she thought it was.
I thought it was when the referendum, I thought it was Terry Wild Park.
Yeah.
It's always been referred to
I mean,
as
it's
Terry
certainly
Wild
not
Park.
Open space property.
Well, right, I mean, I would think it would fall under
Space.
one or
Sure,
the
one or
other,
the other.
you know?
Yeah,
Remember,
yeah.
It wasn't, if I may, it was an issue back in 1984, 1985 when this referendum was put together. Whether that was worked out before the referendum was written or not, I don't know.
was an issue, I know
I was
that.
in Hartford at the time, so it may very well be a park. I'm just pointing out that there was a lot of talk from the city that we'll let you guys do the referendum, but in no way, shape, or form are we going to designate this a park. We may want to build a school on it,
Yeah.
we may want to spin some
It's
of
a
it
big
off.
argument.
We don't want our hands tied when we purchase this property.
If
So
my
we're not going to let you
husband-
guys give it the level of protection that you would normally have for a park.
No,
Yeah,
there's
it's a good
nothing to
question.
prevent you from building a school on it, of course.
Oh, that's what happened to Rogers Park. We had a
So,
huge fight.
including this new,
Well, I mean, within
just
less
have
than
to
a
get
year,
the votes to do
a
it.
gigantic tank went on the property,
Yeah.
which you can see from.
Yeah.
Mr. Montgomery?
Bob just gave me the opening. I believe that this committee was formed as a result of a motion made by Ted Kasumpas. The council approved in January of 2007 to look at adding a layer of protection to the 5 major parks and reservations. Terry Well, Richter, Driska, Old Quarry, and Bear Mountain.
How about
And
Rogers?
I'm sorry,
Rogers
it
Park.
was not in the 5. It could have been, but
Despoiled.
that was what was in.
Well, yeah, and here, it said, they were talking about land records of city-owned open space. Okay, and when it says city-owned open space, it specifically lists Terrywell. So, but it also, it says like, so it's
Such
giving
as.
examples,
Right.
such as.
Not limited
So,
to 5.
Bear Mountain, the Dykstra property, Richter Park, and others. So it's not just limited to necessarily those 5, but this is something that is all-encompassing for anything that falls under that category.
And as has been discussed, the process was bogging down somewhat, and the agreement was made in 2009, proceed with Terrywell only, and everyone agreed Terrywell is the major concern. The original discussion was not only about sale and disposition, but also converted use, and Bob just mentioned an example. Other examples are golf course, fire station, municipal garage, and on and on and on. So, the city's not selling, not disposing of, making a significant conversion of the use. Also at the time, there was a lot of encouragement to do this now, because as you said a while ago, have a mayor and have had a council that have been extraordinarily supportive of protecting and managing parklands and open space. And the concern was, who knows what we might have 10 to 15 years from now. We might have a mayor and a council that cares not at all and runs into financial crisis. So there was definitely a concern about adding a layer now for perpetuity. Now I understand the concern that looking at Terrywell only didn't meet the intent of the original motion, and frankly, I'm wondering if looking only at sale and disposition and not at significant conversion of use, per the examples just mentioned, whether that meets the original charge also.
Good idea.
Well, through the chair, there's nothing to prevent, this has to go through, a lot of other steps to become an ordinance. There's nothing to prevent, amendments from being appended to it, including something like that,
That's very important.
So what,
Could we,
But by the way, I have to, I have to, this is the same, your argument is similar to Paul's. If you have, say, 21 members on the council that were duly elected by the people of the city of Danbury, and a mayor is duly, and they want to sell Terrywell Park, it's fundamentally undemocratic to put obstacles in the way of them doing that, isn't it?
I'd argue the opposite. It's fundamentally undemocratic to make it as easy as possible for them to do it. It's not their property.
Whose property is it?
It belongs to
It's the
the
people's property.
electors of the city of Danbury.
That's right.
It belongs to.
Well, who are the electors?
It
The
belongs-
electors act through the council and the mayor.
They do, and they depend, well, I mean, look, we can get into the whole civics
Well,
course
it's
at
kind
another
of a
time.
political
But listen,
science argument.
This is a great discussion, maybe for another time.
Yeah,
Sounds like,
I think we
Yeah,
both want the
I
same
agree.
thing. No, I think we do. We both want the same thing. We want as much protection as we possibly can. We're looking at this through different ends. If I just may continue, since I seem to have stolen the floor, I agree wholeheartedly with Bill. I think, and I have to apologize, I did not even consider conversion. But that is a big, big thing. We've seen this time and time again in Danbury. We've seen Rogers Park, which was like a gilded glade, become.
well, some of that was a private sale. The Little League field situation was.
Well, I mean, we've
Yeah, but the
seen
school-
housing go in, we've seen a
Housing for
school
the
go in.
elderly.
These are all things
Is
that.
it now housing for just poor people? And is that a lot of stuff
Hey,
going
it
on?
would be great to live in a park, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's probably not the greatest idea to look at your park as inventory to do stuff on that's not for a park. And as we're seeing now with Lee Farm, and as the price of that seems to be going more, we could have bought Lee Farm in the 1960s for like $100 or something. I'm being facetious. We'll never be able to buy Lee Farm. It'll take it. We'll have
We
to,
will
somebody will,
provide it.
Zuckerberg will have to give us 30% of Facebook to be able to afford Lee Farm. But conversion of use, I think, is something that this ordinance should speak to. I don't know if
I agree.
Councilor Yaman wants to include that now or go to amendment. I worry about amendments sometimes because the amendment itself can change the ordinance to such an extent, we have to recommit. So we could find ourselves being advised in June that if we add that amendment, the whole thing has to go back. So maybe with that, you guys might want to continue for that. Just to look at that.
No,
That's a big
Mr.
thing.
Rundle?
One more quick comment. Per Bob's comment a few minutes ago, my understanding is, in the final analysis, the city can do almost anything it wants.
Pretty much.
By eminent domain or other. The original thrust of this initiative was to make it difficult, for lack of a better word, to sell, dispose, significantly convert the use to, our jewels, our 4 or 5 or ever how many you want to say, major parks and reservations.
And that's what this does. Well, it goes down, it moves further down and makes it more difficult.
But it doesn't, as far as I can see, Bob, it doesn't address use. It
Yeah,
doesn't
that's-
address, golf course, school.
Yeah.
Still, the city still owns it. City didn't sell it, didn't dispose of it, but the city, the city fathers 10 years from now say, well, we ought to build a big school in the Terrywell Meadow.
Yeah.
What's the, not only what's to make it impossible, what's even to make that difficult, challenging?
Mr. Perkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Corporation Counsel, what would be one of the difficulties or limitations of adding some type of use clause to this particular
Well,
ordinance?
there wouldn't be. It would have to be drafted,
Can that be,
pretty carefully
can that
drafted.
be included in verbally tonight?
Uh,
Through the chair?
I mean, you would have to use, an enormous amount of fudge words like, significant, like if you're gonna, change of use, if you had another azalea, you're changing the use and, you'd have to think that through pretty carefully, I would think. I doubt we could whip something up that would be workable tonight that would address use or significant, that would be workable.
Unless there's more, I would like to make a motion. Motion simply being that with everything we've heard tonight, there seems to be a lot more questions than what we have that is covered in the changes that we have. And I just think that we should continue this ad hoc committee until we can get all the answers that we actually need, cover conversion, whatever it may be. And that would be my motion, to just continue.
Well, I think we need some direction
Well, we had conversion, there's that.
Conversion alone would be a direction
Yeah,
I would.
that would be probably like the biggest one right there.
We could draft something, but
Well, that's what I said, we,
Right,
what's
that's
another
easy.
month? We've been going,
That's right.
I got
Conversion
information
would be
from
the biggest
2007 on this. I would, that would be my motion, just continue the ad hoc until we can get something from Corporation Council to cover all of the bases that were mentioned here tonight.
Do we, and Councilwoman Teschultz?
Before I second, can I ask a question? Because I
Oh,
don't
sure.
know if I want to second until I get my question
my guest.
answered. I'm sorry. Is there another ordinance or something that does address use? Or conversion or anything like that? Of city property or
no,
there?
not that I know off the top of my head. You mean similar to 71-60, other, as I talked about this being cumulative, there may be something in some of the Terrywell material.
That would be the only thing
Yeah.
that, the original, that Dennis brought up.
Right.
It did,
Yeah.
but there's a master plan.
In the master plan.
Master plan.
But still, the common council votes
No,
on
I
the
mean
master
overall,
plan.
I mean
But
overall.
nothing that would cover parkland or open space.
Well, as much as I don't wanna do this and come to another meeting, I'm gonna second.
I don't want either, but we gotta do
So we
something.
have a second on the floor. I would like to, if we can delineate what we're, some direction to Corporation Council so that we can,
Well, if I could make a suggestion,
Mhm.
so that we could get something accomplished, at least get something in place. Use this as a template, and if it's the will of the committee to explore, expanding this to cover use, conversion, that sort of thing, with some articulate language, we'd be happy to do that, and then come back and hopefully get this.
Well, I think if we
Yeah.
could,
Instead of
if we
just,
could add like some
you know.
protections like we have added into the parkland and open space into this with the supermajority and the public hearings and if we can include some sort of protections also
for
like
use.
that for use.
Right.
Is that
Yeah,
what
Use
you're
well,
looking
use
at?
would be a big thing. Also,
Right.
if there's any state statutes, that would be involved.
Well, they apply in any,
Yeah.
you don't have to even mention them.
Okay.
Like 7163 applies to this, even though it's, not recited in here, so.
My main concern would be strong enough language to cover use and,
And
what
some kind of
avenue-
major, we'd have to articulate it some, we just can't say change of use because it's too broad. That's why I don't want to whip up something,
No, that's fine,
Yeah.
that's fine.
good. Okay. Well, technically,
I was just gonna say that there may be some ordinances out there already that you guys could research, that's.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody may have already.
Oh, that's, we always start with,
No, we said that.
yeah,
Oh, you didn't, you said that?
yeah.
what's that? I mean, if
Okay, we'll take a vote on the motion. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions, any nays? No? Okay,
Move to adjourn.
motion to.
Second.
Second, okay. Bob, yeah, all those in favor of adjourning? signify by saying
Aye.
Okay.
Master plan is so long, and I've read
Thank you.
gives a plan